Blog Talk Radio.
But I like to get to know you better. See, you kinda busy, so I guess I send a letter. If the letter don't work, then I guess I'll approach it. If you can't socialize, I guess I'll coach you. Cause Jimmy is far from the average knucklehead. I don't wanna spend most of my time in bed, but in case I have to get hard, I get hard like lead. And the proof is in the pudding, that's what my mom said.
Baby, I stayed away too long.
And as you did,
Did I leave your mind when I was gone?
We gonna get this right. I just
All right, my people, that was a snippet of G-Man, the rapper. How are you doing this afternoon, Mr. Sean Kennedy?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Mr. Kennedy, everyone, is from the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Lawyers Incorporated, a 501c3 nonprofit company. So what we're going to talk about is the press release that was sent out by Mr. Wilson. It's for the media. It was for immediate release, and it says National Black People Police Group condemns assault on nation's capital. Black law enforcement officers called for all who were complicit to be charged on Wednesday, January 6, 2021, at approximately 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The United States Capitol was seized and captured for the first time in more than 200 years at the United States Capitol building. The world witnessed a complete failure of general safety and security protocols that put everyone in danger after domestic terrorists stormed the building. The event, captured live on numerous media stations, was perpetrated by what must only be considered a group of politically sponsored domestic terrorists. The rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol, caused destruction and mayhem, and interrupted the process of government, and endangered the lives of not only the various members of Congress who are there to conduct the certification of the Electoral College to finally verify the rightful election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but also many law enforcement officers who were there simply to do their job of keeping the U.S. Capitol safe. Yet this event also made the world witness in real time what black and brown American citizens have been saying for decades. There is both a conscious and unconscious level of institutionalized systemic racism in the manner in which black and brown citizens are policed as compared to white citizens. White privilege is alive and well in America's policing. It was on full display when white criminals, anarchists, segregationists, and domestic terrorists were allowed to loot, desecrate, and decimate the United States Capitol building. I'll stop there, Mr. Kennedy.
Okay.
So, the press release by Mr. Charles Wilson. And you're the information man, am I correct?
Yeah,
That's what I call
the information officer. I'm the information officer.
Information officer. Okay. So how do you feel about this? What do you feel about what happened January 6, 2021? Let me hear it from you.
Okay, well, just to let you know, one of the biggest reasons why we put out the press release, we wanted it to be known where our organization stands, which is the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers. So we wanted to be clear that we were denouncing each and every person who was there who breached the Capitol building, each and every person that threatened people, that destroyed property, that stole property. We wanted to be clear that the treatment that we saw on January the 6th, because most of the people present were white, and these were domestic terrorists, not protesters. These were domestic terrorists. These were extremists factions. These were nationalists. They were not peaceful protesters. And we wanted to show that there was a very distinct difference in the law enforcement presence and hands-off approach as compared to the year before in 2020 when the Black Lives Matter individuals came onto the Capitol to exercise their First Amendment rights. There was a distinct contrast to the police presence and how they were engaged or not engaged. And what we saw on January the 6th was irreprehensible. It was an embarrassment to our entire country, based on the intel that even citizens knew based on social media. And we're quite sure that the various law enforcement agencies on the local, the state, and federal level was very aware of the intel. And our question is, where was the preparation? Where was the law enforcement presence there? But we feel that this was very deliberate not to have the manpower available because we feel that they wanted the people who came to terrorize the Capitol building, they wanted things to be hand-off. They wanted them to be able to come there and basically do what they wanted to do with impunity, which was ridiculous. And we wanted to make sure that we publicly denounced what took place on January the 6th.
Yes, I understand that. So the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers Incorporated, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, denounced this for those who were doing the wrong things, the criminal things. I understand that. So how do you feel about the whole situation? So as a law enforcement officer or former law enforcement officer, I don't know your rank. What is your rank, sir? Or what was your rank?
I retired a year ago from the Chicago Police Department after working 29 years there, and I retired as a sergeant.
Feel that there might have been some policemen involved?
Well, just based on the reports. Well, first of all, I'm just appalled that the U.S. Capitol Police were put in a predicament that they were just exponentially outnumbered. You know, I felt for them. I felt for the black officers in particular, especially. I have read a report where two black officers spoke out, and they talked about just how bad they felt, getting their butts kicked while knowing that you had some Capitol Police officers, and these were white officers, who opened the barricades and the doors for these domestic terrorists to come into the building. When they found out that some of them took these domestic terrorists, so as a law enforcement officer, I felt appalled because we're supposed to be this quote-unquote blue family that we're supposed to have each other's back. But the reality of it is this blue family, it only exists when it's for their purposes. And that's when, trying to get you not to tell on a fellow officer. So that's the time that things that, the blue lines, makes a difference or, don't cross that blue line. But as a law enforcement, I was embarrassed to see, what took place. Any type of intel the agencies have that there's going to be some type of disturbance, especially when you have different right-wing extremists coming to the Capitol, you make preparations. You make sure that you have more than enough manpower. So just to see what took place, those Capitol Police officers, they were overpowered. There was no way in the world they could handle that crowd effectively because the manpower was not in place. So my question goes, why were certain, say, National Guards and other law enforcement agencies, why were they denied to come there and to help out or to make sure, based on the intel, that they had more than enough manpower in place, barricades, at least the same level of law enforcement personnel that was present when the Black Lives Matter protesters came there just a year before. I'm outraged as a law enforcement officer because
they really
a police officer. You had a police officer, a Capitol police officer, who died because of it. So I'm appalled with this. It's ridiculous. And then as more reports came out as far as the number of off-duty police officers and also retired police officers who came there and they were part of this domestic terrorist mob. I'm just appalled with it, but I'm not surprised because being on the job for 29 years, I know that you have there's the systemic racism is very apparent to me. And anyone who any law enforcement officer who says it doesn't exist, either they're part of the problem, meaning the entitled crowd, or they're living in a bubble. You know, it's very apparent from whether you work in a large size agency or a small agency. This is a problem. So on January the 6th, even individuals who may not have ever seen the systemic racism in their face, it played out on national television, live and in color. So there's nowhere in the world that people can now say systemic racism do not exist.
No, they cannot say that systemic racism does not exist because they would be lying. And they're flat lying. Systemic racism exists. It has always existed. It exists today. It exists today. The killing, just everything is systemic racism, and I think it's at the root of this country because this country was built by slaves. There's no other race of people that I can think of who came to America against their will. Everybody here has been immigrants and want to come over here. I can't think of another race of people. Can you, sir, Mr. Kennedy?
I cannot think another race of people that endured the level of oppression and degradation that African Americans had to endure. Things have happened to several races of people. I look at what's happened to the indigenous people of our country, the Indians. But no, I think the Black experience is very unique. I think a big part of the problem, especially when you're speaking of police reform, that means change. That means breaking up the status quo, and that's when you're going to start feeling the pushback even harder than ever before. So it's almost like the more that you feel a pushback, the more that you know what you're doing is the correct thing. But like I said, you're going to feel it more as, you know, you're starting to challenge that status quo, or things are starting to change and put a more level playing field out there. So, you know, we know that we're doing the right things, but it's just unfortunate that in 2021 that we're still going through many things that Black officers have filed and lawsuits in federal courts. Just so many times, and have won many of those lawsuits just to have it settled or whatever, and just to also know that things are still going on. I mean, yes, it might have changed in small increments, but we still have the same problem.
Who filed lawsuits?
Black officers have filed lawsuits since the 60s. I mean, I read one report. Where with the Capitol Police Department, since 2000, I think it says 2001, officers have filed over 250 discrimination lawsuits. Some are still pending. Some are have been settled. But even when something is settled, a lot of times these agencies do not have to admit wrongdoing, even though they may pay out the lawsuit. But just knowing that, I'm going back to the 60s, the number of lawsuits that have been filed by Black officers across the country in these different agencies we are still facing the same problem. So there is no real change. There's incremental changes. Policies may change a little bit, but like I said, in 2021, we should not still be fighting the same things that our forefathers and mothers were fighting in the 1960s, but we are.
No, we should not be. We should not be dealing with this in 2021. I live in a town where up until a few years ago, the cemeteries were still segregated, and Sunday is the most segregated time in the place that I live and reside. So I understand racism. I understand what being an outcast is. But that's okay with me, being an outcast. What gets me is the racism when you're an outcast. When you're an outcast, the racism is hard. It's okay with me to be an outcast, but the racism is hard.
Well, let me ask you, do you feel that you are an outcast because of the racism?
Yes. I feel that I'm an outcast because of the racism and because I stand up for my rights, civil rights.
Okay, but when you stand up and fight for your right that you should have as a citizen, quite naturally the powers to be are going to close ranks, and then you're going to have an even major problem. But I think one of the most disheartening parts of that is when you know that there are other black men and women who are experiencing the same thing that you're experiencing, and when you look for their support, whether it's emotional, financial, whatever, or for them to at least stand with you, oftentimes they do not. And a lot of times you have the individual who's trying to fight for themselves, standing by themselves, and it shouldn't be that way. You know, we really do not understand and are not cognizant of our collective strength in numbers. I'm not sure what it's going to take for us to actually recognize that.
My other three of my stand alone. I myself. Things go on that my family don't even know about. But I take it. I take it because I'm different. I take it because I'm black. But I still stand up and fight. I'm always going to fight for my civil rights. No matter how long I am, I'm going to fight for my civil rights. And that makes me a recluse or makes me an outcast. That's okay. I'm fine with that. Because sometimes, in some situations, I hate to say this, but black people will join forces with white people. Just to silence you.
Well, that would happen on different. Well, that would happen on different levels. But let's go back to the Capitol situation. You know, when you look back at the different people who have stormed state capitals, and I'm speaking of in 2020, there's also a report out that actually came out today that talked about Oregon, Michigan, and another place I can't think of off the top of my head, but they talked about how in certain in one instance, there were lawmakers. There were, people on the state Congress who actually let these individuals in. And it's, and when you look at how the police did not respond on a state level, if you do not meet the force necessary to deal with people who want to riot, people who want to breach the state capitol and cause havoc, if you do not do that on a state level, quite naturally, these individuals, whether you call them domestic terrorists, different extremists, nationalists, what have you, they're going to feel empowered and entitled. So what I saw on January the 6th at the U.S. Capitol, it did not surprise me. Because on the state level, the precedent has already been set that, we're able to gain access in some instances with firearms because certain states have open carry. So if you did not address it on a state level with your law enforcement, quite naturally, those individuals are going to feel empowered and emboldened to do the same thing on a much higher level for the U.S. Capitol, and that's exactly what played out. But the problem I have is, even on the state level, if this would have occurred with a contingent of black people, you would have seen a different police response. That's the problem I have because it's not equitable. You have more than enough manpower. You use tear gas, rubber bullets, all type of resources that law enforcement have, at their disposal. They will use that with black peaceful protesters, but you will not use it with white domestic terrorists who are armed, who will come and hurt someone, who is looking to kidnap someone. Like I said, it's not equitable. And like I said, it played out in living color for the entire world to see.
Yes, it did. And they probably would have grenades there if it had been black people. I hate to think what it would have been like in Washington, D.C. if those had been black people. I don't even want to think about it.
Well, I'm just surprised that there were only 5 people.
And black people always have to be peaceable. They handled those people with kid gloves.
I was surprised that there were only 5 people who lost their lives on January 6th. I'm very surprised it was only 5 individuals. But if that crowd would have been predominantly black, the numbers would be a stark difference.
Yes. There would have been more black people murdered than white than there were. They had 5 people who died or were murdered. But if those had been black people, it would have been in the hundreds.
Yes, and it's just unfortunate. But like I said, it's almost as if January the 6th needed to occur to show the world what there are some people who just refuse to buy into the fact that there is institutionalized systemic racism throughout every single entity within our world, whether it's dealing with law enforcement, education, access to medical, housing, just anything that you can mention, there is systemic racism at the root of it. That's what this country was built upon, regardless to how you try to disguise it, what you try to call it. There is a difference, and like I said, it played out for the world to see. When it was made known that those domestic terrorists were there to kidnap some of the people of Congress, whether they be white or black, trust me, it made individuals understand what they were truly dealing with. So even those who may have felt entitled, they feared for their life, and possibly for the very first time. But they got a chance to see what many black people experience on a daily basis.
Yes, and I just believe I didn't have a whole lot of sympathy. I'm not a racist. I'm not a bigot. But I just didn't have a whole lot of sympathy because when the black people were being murdered, when black people are being murdered left and right, they stayed silent and said that America's current leader, or soon-to-be former leader, was just being himself. So he's just being himself.
Well, just being himself is unacceptable. This man, who is still technically the President of the United States, in his 4 years, I have not seen anything presidential about anything that he has done or said. He has been an embarrassment to the office of the presidency, period. So I don't care how people try to change his words or his actions or twist it around. Like I said, January the 6th had people finally open their eyes for those who were closed.
Yes, it did. Yes, sir, it did. So, how do you feel now that it's out there, that everybody knows what's here in America? The world knows. The world knows about the different treatment. The world knows that if those were black people, that more of them would have been murdered. Now that the world knows, how do you feel as a man, as a black man, as a former sergeant?
Well, as a human being, I feel needed to happen, and I feel that it needed to happen so it can just take off the blinders off of people. And I think
you're a little muffled, sir.
Is this better?
A little better.
Feel that this made the work.
I cannot hear you at all, sir. Mr. Kennedy? Do you need to call back in? Do you need me to play some music so you can call back in?
And not just on the police department, but as far as policy, as far as laws. We know the world, I think, does now recognize you can't just put a band-aid on something and think it's going to be okay. You are going to have to make some serious and deliberate changes so that this does not happen again. I don't care if it's dealing with black domestic terrorists or white domestic terrorists. You can no longer turn a blind eye to what happened. You can no longer, like I said, put a band-aid on it. You have to address it, which means it needs real transparency and real accountability. What they're going to do as far as, say, with the federal government and so forth, what they're going to do with the people who were there, who breached the building and caused the havoc that they did, it's going to be interesting to see just how many arrests that I made and what the charges are going to be. But I think, like I said, I really feel that January 6th needed to happen so that the real change, not just, incremental change, but real deliberate change needs to be made if you want to keep America safe from itself. And we're not talking about foreign terrorists. We're talking about just from people who live within America.
Yes, sir. But like I was saying earlier, the same thing they did to black people in these cities, states, towns, and counties, the same type of people went to Washington, D.C. and tried and did the same thing. They just didn't. They didn't get to kill anyone. None of the senators or representatives.
Thank goodness that they did not. But like I said,
yes,
just based on what happened January the 6th, I believe the world realized or recognizes that unless they really take some deliberate action, that this will occur again. And this time, it will not result in the death of only 5 individuals.
Yes, it's going to happen again. I'm certain. They're really wired up, and they've been training for years for this, for a civil war, for a battle. So, yeah, it's going to happen again. And unfortunately, I'm not glad of it. I'm not one of the people they attacked. Yeah, it'll happen again. Unfortunately, sadly, but truthfully. Truthful. All right. Mr. Kennedy?
Yes, I'm still here.
Yes. I'll pray that it doesn't happen, but I know it will. In my heart, actually, but I'm still praying.
I pray that when the next time where there is credible intel in place, that law enforcement and the government does what's necessary to be able to contain the problem, and if it gets out of hand, to have the manpower and the resources available to handle it adequately. Period. You know,
yes,
I'm
it's just
hoping,
that it's in politics. They're in politics. They're in police. They're at the sheriff's department. They're at the police department. They're in the military. So I saw on TV where they had found two Army men, National Guardsmen or something, and found their connection to white terrorist groups and took them off of duty from the Capitol building. Go ahead, Mr. Kennedy.
Oh, I'm finished.
You finished? Okay. All right. So you have nothing else to say?
No, just I just hope that January the 6th was a wake-up call for the world, and I hope that the powers to be, when I'm speaking of law enforcement and the government, act accordingly to prevent it from happening again.
Yes, sir. I hope so, too. I pray so. All right. Thank you for your time, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Sean Kennedy. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me. Have a nice evening.
Yes, sir. I hope to have you or Mr. Charles Wilson. I've had him 3 or 4 times on Show Talk with Angela Butler. And I thank the National Association of Black Law Enforcement, Incorporated.
Okay, and it's actually National Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers.
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you for correcting me. I appreciate that. I also know you have correction officers, right? I was reading you have correction officers as part of your organization. Am I correct? All right. I guess he hung up, everyone. All right. Thank you for listening to Show Talk with Angela Butler. I hope you enjoyed the interview. I certainly did. I learned a few things. I hope you all did, too. That's the whole point of Show Talk, to learn something. That was Mr. Sean Kennedy. He's from the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers, Incorporated. He's a former sergeant who's retired. He's given his input, very valuable input, and everyone stay in prayer and just stay strong and pray that we all get through this pandemic.